if my math is correct, I believe we have burned through 33 open Saturdays just to get to this point in the college football season. This is the Matt Barrie Show here on the ESPN College Football YouTube channel. I am so happy that we've embarked on a full slate of Saturday games. And as always, throughout the season, the great Paul Finebaum will be joining me throughout the week. And the star of Swamp Kings, really, if you got into the documentary on Netflix. I was thrown with, fine, but let me just tell you this real quick. Before we get into the week, you are a walking soundbite. You're a producer's dream.
Yeah, it's so funny, Matt. I mean, I'm walking down the street and people are saying, "Hey, I saw you in Swamp Kings." And I mean, I've done a million things far more important and compelling. But this thing happened. I did this interview a year and a half ago. Not that I forgot about it, but I just really didn't give much thought to it. And all of a sudden, there I am as the spokesperson for the Tim Tebow, Urban Meyer era, which I'm quite embarrassed about. In any way, because I'm lumped into Urban Meyer in any walk of life, but. It's one thing to be, on this program or that program, but once you hit Netflix, man, you've made it.
You've absolutely made it. In fact, here's just to show the beautiful people who watch this show, the Matt Barrie Show on the College Football YouTube channel. We had two prominent stars that are the mainstays on this show. Dan Mullen, he gave us a preview of it last week, and then the great Paul Finebaum. So if you really want industry movers and shakers on Netflix, come see us here.
And I've got to ask Dan Mullen. I mean, I'm sure you saw the whatever game it was when he literally, gets down on the ground and says, "I want you to and uses, every expletive under the world." I mean, that's a side of Dan I've never seen before.
Oh, the great part about Dan, here's what I'm learning about Mullen, and I'll be with him a lot this season. We're going to be calling Thursday Night College Football together, and he'll be in studio with me all day Saturday. The switch of persona from everyday Dan Mullen to coaching Dan Mullen is one that is absolutely fascinating. When you break down big picture, Paul, coaches how they're wired off the field and coaches how they're wired when they are coaching. It's fascinating.
Yeah, no, he does not leave out he's come up with 18 degrees of an F word that I've never heard before. But yeah, it was fun. It's over now. I'm going to have to move on to my next Netflix appearance coming to a theater near you.
I can't wait. Maybe someday I'll have the honor of appearing in the same Netflix special as Paul Finebaum. But the week one schedule is here. We got a little bit of a taste of it in week 0. I don't want to really dive into it too much because same as it ever was, USC's defense stinks. Caleb Williams is great. But I'll say this. If over the last 3 to 5 years, Paul, we made this statement, if Notre Dame had a quarterback, they'd be something to deal with. And just quickly on Notre Dame, that game against Navy was close last year. This thing was over by halftime.
Yeah, that's a big impact. And, Sam Hartman could have gone a lot of places and he went to Notre Dame and, they will benefit from that. And Matt, as I think about Notre Dame and I think about that game, I just also think about how college football missed an opportunity to have more games on week 0. There's nothing going on. You have 2 free weekends if you use that effectively before the NFL just completely suffocates the world. And I don't know why we have 2 main Notre Dame and FC, and other than that, hardly anyone bothered.
Well, and you couldn't even watch USC because it was on the Pac-12 network. And so the best team playing on Saturday, you couldn't see. And you had Vanderbilt kick off their season against Kentucky. I'm with you. I think it would be smart. Well, put it this way. I think college football was smart to make this upcoming week, Labor Day weekend, where everybody's back at school. Everything's situated. You've got a Thursday game, Utah, Florida. You got a good game on Friday. You got a full slate on Saturday. You got Clemson, Duke. LSU, Florida State Sunday, and then Clemson, Duke Monday. So they do a good job of a grand opening weekend. But look, when you look at the week 1 slate, and we had talked about Sam Hartman and quarterback at Notre Dame a minute ago and what he's going to add to the Fighting Irish this year, there still has not been a quarterback decision at Alabama. Nick Saban comes out yesterday. We thought he was going to name a starter. We thought he would let us in a little bit on what's going on. Paul, he didn't even release a depth chart. Now, I'm not one to question Nick Saban and his decision-making, but not releasing a depth chart for the first time in 17-something years ahead of week one. He said they didn't need those distractions, but we're still talking about it anyway on the fact that he didn't release a depth chart to the media.
And anytime you talk about Nick Saban, it's like talking about certain people in public life. There's a group that will defend him no matter what. So I heard a lot of people yesterday say, evil genius, he's outsmarted the media again. I'm not sure that that's really a case. I mean, I thought he showed some petulance when he talked about how I told you guys last year this would be the last one. I mean, the point is everybody has a depth chart, and even if you have a depth chart, you don't have to say who your starter is. College football is littered with coaches who go either or.
Or right.
That's fine. Okay, I'm not concerned about that. It's just a model, and for him to say, Matt, that it caused a lot of distraction. I mean, it caused a lot of distractions on the team. I mean, everybody that played Little League baseball, Pee Wee football, everybody knows who the starter is and who the backup is, and that doesn't mean it's over. And I just thought there was a disconnect there, and I have a lot of friends in Alabama who are puzzled by it. And there's those who say Saban knows what he's doing, but in this case, I don't know how you can support that argument, because it just shows a degree of indecision. And by the way, we're talking about Middle Tennessee.
Right.
But it doesn't really matter how many quarterbacks you play. It's all about the next week against Texas. But it just still was a weird look for Nick Saban.
Especially when you're coming into your first game of the season, and we like to, we do our jobs in the media where we look at a depth chart and we say, okay, like Ryan Day speaking to the media. We're taping this at Tuesday a.m. at around 9:40. Ryan Day is going to speak to the media today. We're expected to hear that both Devin Brown and Kyle McCord are both going to play in the season opener at Indiana. We expect that to be the case because we don't know that he's made a decision, but at least he's going to let us know we believe that two quarterbacks are going to play.
Right.
Here's where I'm at with the Saban and the Alabama decision. Part one, I think we all believe that Jalen Milroe, physically gifted, is the best quarterback on Alabama in terms of physical gifts. We know Tyler Buchner came in from Notre Dame after his offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees, was hired. Okay, so we know that there's the transfer portal and the connection there. And we also know Ty Simpson's a 5-star, 4-star, whatever the hell it might be, highly rooted kid. So this says to me that they might not legitimately know who they're going to go to battle against Texas with. Like you said, this week's irrelevant because you can go quarter and a half with each of the three and see who pops. So I don't know that they really know who came out of the fall is the dominant number one.
And it's not like Nick Saban, really should care if he starts somebody in one game and pulls him for the next. He's done that before. He did that 5 or 6 years ago. It's just, I think sometimes Saban just looks like he wants a battle with the media. And Matt, it's not like he's dealing with the White House press corps. There's not anybody in that media that would dare to ask him, what color shirt he's wearing. I mean, they're scared to death of this guy. And it's just, I don't know. What I don't like, and every time I say this, people in Alabama get mad. I don't like the bullying of the media. I mean, don't bully people because you can. And Saban has made a career at Alabama and maybe elsewhere of bullying those who are weaker than him and don't have the ability, and that's just not a good look. And that's my only complaint about this. The rest of it, I'll find out Saturday. I'm sure the crew doing the game will know who the quarterback is, so they can prepare. I mean, you know how important that is, Matt. Like you're getting ready for a game on a Thursday night, and you don't know enough about both quarterbacks, so you have to know the starter. I mean, yeah, it helps to know a little bit,
right?
But once again, Nick Saban has made this about himself as opposed to anyone else, and maybe that's his goal. But the only way we'll know whether this was the right move or not is if they have a quarterback at the end of the Texas game.
That's it. That's all you need to know. And I can't wait to break this one down with you on Sunday when we see who goes out there and plays quarterback for Alabama the most and looks most effective when they play Middle Tennessee State. All right. So when you go into week one, Paul, it's one of those weeks where there's a couple of good matchups. There's one or two great matchups, and there's some where teams schedule their week one game and they move on. But I want to focus on a couple and hold the theme of what does this mean for? Because I think there are a lot of matchups this week where you could look and say, you know what, this means a lot to team X, Y, and Z. So I want to start on Thursday. Utah and Florida. Florida won this game at the Swamp last year with Anthony Richardson. They go to Utah this week. We don't know the status of Cam Rising. Brent Keithy, I believe, is another player that's question marked right now. But right out of the gate, what does this game mean for Billy Napier and the Gators?
I think it's a game Florida has to win, Matt. And because of Cam Rising, I mean, how do you get a gift like this? How do you get a chance to play a really good team with one of the premier quarterbacks in the country, and he may not play? And at this point, he probably, even if he plays, is not going to be very effective. I mean, I think you have to go in there and just plant the flag. And to me, last year was an aberration. No reason to, that was just too weird about what happened there. And we know what happened afterwards. But this, you go in there and you beat Utah, and I think they're beatable. And then suddenly you set up a game in 2 weeks against Tennessee, where you're talking about Swamp Kings too. I mean, you might see something like that, because a lot of folks are skeptical that Tennessee with a new quarterback is going to be capable of going on the road. So I think it's that important. The problem is you go in there and screw around and lose the game against a second or third or a fourth team quarterback, and all this manufactured momentum of the offseason starts to go away pretty quickly.
I'm so glad you brought up the Swamp Kings parallel, because that's exactly where I was going to go with this. Because watching that documentary, people know that Urban Meyer was the chosen one. He was a young coach, not a lot of head coaching experience when he took the job at Florida. People forget how much pressure he was in after year one, going into that year two that led to a national championship. And he needed some momentum to go right, because much like Billy Napier, had some good offseason recruiting and bringing in Tim Tebow and Percy Harvin, one of the best classes in the country. I think they were ranked number 1, 2, or 3. It didn't matter. There's so many services. But he used the offseason to jumpstart the regular season. And so for me, this game means everything to Billy Napier, because fans have to know that the coach that they brought in a year ago is making this thing head in the right direction. And look, fans is short for fanatic. We know they freak out about everything. But I think at least, at the very least, Paul, in the back of their heads, they're realistic enough to know when something's headed in the right and wrong direction. And I think that's why this week's everything for Billy Napier. And he's got the audience all to himself.
And what about the irony, playing at Utah, where Urban Meyer and Dan Mullen came from? And it was all because the president at Utah, Bernie Manchin, ended up at Florida. It's pretty amazing, the connection here. And I think you'll be hearing things like that. And I don't know, Matt. I mean, if Cam Rising was 100% healthy, I don't think this game would be in debate, a matter of debate. But I think because he's not in the game, it's open for conversation. And I just think if Florida is going to be, Florida needs to act like it's Florida. And you may, and not because I just got through watching Swamp Kings, but because I'm down there every year. That is a brutal fan base. They don't take they don't take anything other than success. And that's why, I mean, Steve Spurrier, who's one of the great coaches of the modern era, left Florida in disgust. I mean, he walked out of there. He took the job in Washington, which was a terrible job for a terrible owner in Danny Snyder. And, people say, well, he had a bad season. He did have a bad season his last year at Florida. He beat Maryland in the Orange Bowl and finished number 3 in the country. And it was considered a debacle because he lost to Tennessee on the final weekend. That was the year 9/11. Everything got moved. And he didn't win the national championship. The pressure will be that intense fairly soon for Billy Napier.
So that's a big one, just to kick this thing off on Thursday, August 31st, 8 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. Okay, on a much smaller scale in terms of where they are headed, what does week 1 mean for Deion Sanders, Colorado, taking on last year's darling TCU?
It's huge for a lot of reasons. You're going to watch and see whether he can win the game or not, which very few people think he can. But you're also going to see what that program looks like. And if it looks like a bunch of misfits, who have never played together, but who have individual talent, then I think the spotlight that will be on him Saturday morning will not carry well to the next week. I know the next week, what is that? Nebraska, I think.
Yeah, they've got a tough start to their season.
Yeah, I mean, everyone loves Deion Sanders, but this is sports, Matt, and you happen to work as I do at the number one company, and at ESPN when you do your rundown for Sports Center, you don't go, Colorado, they're 0-3. That's a good story. Why don't we lead with that today? It's not the way it works.
You never know.
Well, okay. But in Deion's case, he's got to be relevant. He's got to stay relevant and get through this season. Otherwise, he's going to be very angry, very cantankerous, and really will do some more damage than good.
So here's what it is with Deion. No one, perhaps in the history of the sport, as a head coach, has won an offseason over and over more than Deion Sanders. He's a marketing guru. No one wins off the field more than Deion. No. The biggest knock on Deion when he was at Jackson State is that he had talent, Power 5 talent, playing at HBCUs where they knew that they had more talent than anybody they rolled the ball out against. Now that he's in a Power 5, now that he's at Colorado, the crowd that doesn't think Deion is more than just a motivator, a marketing guy, and shoot a documentary guy, they're going to be feasting on Colorado to prove their point that Deion's not a real coach. And so for me, for Deion, he has got to say the same thing. You can't let this over the course of your first season burn out. Because I think Colorado's going to be 3-9, maybe 4-8, maybe. But there's got to be evidence to the contrary that for the Deion can't coach crowd in the traditionalist, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how they handle Deion and how Deion handles himself throughout a season now, Paul, where you're playing a lot of good football teams.
Yeah, I mean, going back a year to your point, I mean, they've lost the big game 2 years in a row, even at Jackson State.
Yeah.
And they won. They won big. They got 60 minutes in there. They got game day. They got everything they needed, which gave him what he wanted, and that's a big-time job. And now he has it. He has to show exactly what you're saying, because I just don't think Colorado can sustain itself. I mean, all the documentaries and the whatever else Deion is doing, it's great, but who wants to watch a losing team?
Yeah, so it'll be fun to watch what Deion does against TCU. TCU a heavy favorite in that one, as expected. Okay, a little bit off the radar. We're going to whip through 3 more games of what does this mean. I want to know, what does it mean for North Carolina and South Carolina in Charlotte in a battle of the 2 states that I think will be a great game?
Yeah, I think that's really so much upside for South Carolina with a win, and so much danger if they lose. And the reason I say there's so much danger is they've got Georgia in a couple of weeks on the road. So they have a good chance of having 2 losses if they don't win this game by the 3rd weekend in September. And that's without even looking at the rest of their schedule, which includes Clemson at the end. So they have to win this game. As far as North Carolina, I don't take them that seriously anyway in terms of being a conference or national contender. But when you have one of the best players in the country and you're playing in your home state, you need to win. And I'll spare the audience my feelings and yours toward Mac Brown. We love the guy, and he's had a great second act.
Yes, he has.
But it could be a lot better. And a win here really gives them some momentum. They have often screwed up. I think it was last year, maybe the year before. I can't remember. They blew that opening game against Virginia Tech, and it really kind of set them to a spiral the rest of the way.
Yeah, North Carolina got off to a great start last year, and then towards the end, Drake May, same thing, got up to a really Heisman Trophy-like start, and then towards the last 4 or 5 games of the season, really started to trend down. And that's why, for me, this game means everything for Drake May, and that if it wasn't for Caleb Williams, he'd be talked about as the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. But he's the guy they've ID'd as the it prospect at quarterback. And so for Drake May, he wants to show everybody that the last part of last season was just kind of an anomaly in the fact that it was his first year as a full-time starter. He's added some weight. He looks pretty good and looks the part of a top flight quarterback. But getting out there against an SEC team, that means bragging rights for North Carolina. And for Spencer Rattler in South Carolina, they were one of those quieter, feel-good teams to talk about in the offseason. And that's why for Shane Beamer and everybody, this means a ton for him because of how he ended the last season. He beat Tennessee. I know Hendon Hooker got hurt. He beat Clemson, which isn't the easiest thing to do nowadays if you're South Carolina. So this game means everything kind of in a similar way. Drake to get started after a bad ending to the season, in South Carolina to continue the momentum of people in Columbia saying, hey, you know what? Maybe we can go back to those Spurrier years where we can flirt with double-digit wins in a couple more seasons.
I can't get over the fact that Drake May, when he committed many years ago, he committed to Alabama.
Yeah.
And he was wooed by Alabama in the offseason. And I give him credit for staying the course. Everyone knows his brother was a star on the basketball program on a national championship team, but he had plenty of options. I don't know what encouraged him to remain in Chapel Hill that final year, but he is a phenomenal player and would be off and running. But yeah, the Beamer train, even though they won those 2 games, they lost to Notre Dame. You would never know it. I haven't seen a South Carolina fan yet that even cared if they blew the bowl game. It was all about that those 8 days of beating Tennessee and Clemson.
Yeah, they had so they got beat up in the portal a little bit. Marshawn Lloyd goes out to USC, so they lost some of their talent, but we'll see what Beamer can do with that. I think that game means a lot for both of those schools in week 1. Finally, we'll wrap up with this one because it's the biggest game of week 1. It is LSU, Florida State, the rematch. And these two programs couldn't be any more similar in their expectations, but different in that Mike Norvell gave people hope last year. Now they're at the point where they're picked to be in the college football playoff, to win the ACC, whereas Brian Kelly enters year 2, probably surprised little people in year 1 winning the SEC West. But what does this game mean for Florida State and LSU?
Yeah, I think it probably has more importance for Florida State. And I was looking at a draft list today, Matt, and I wasn't surprised, but I kind of did a double take at all the talent that Florida State has across the board. I mean, they have just so much NFL talent. Of course, so does LSU. But LSU, let's say they lose this game. Yeah, they're out of mulligans. They really have to run the table, but they could. And I mean, all they would have to do to get to the playoffs would be to win the rest of the games, including some nasty road games like Mississippi State and Ole Miss and Alabama, and then just simply go to Atlanta and beat Georgia, and they're in the playoffs.
That's it.
But they would still be alive. My argument is that if Florida State loses this game, they're really in trouble because they have the road game at Clemson and a couple of other ones, but they'll be judged by on a much different scale, depending on how many undefeated teams or one-loss teams are hanging around at the end.
Yeah, and you would like to think that a week 1 wouldn't damage you too much, but we saw LSU lose this game last year, still play for an SEC championship, and no one was getting through Georgia in that game. Georgia was just better than everybody else. But I don't know, to your point, I don't know that the ACC is strong enough top to bottom to carry a one-loss team. And that'll be the biggest thing for Florida State. You get through this game with a win. Let's say, I don't even know if you could trip up against Clemson and still get in. I think Florida State almost has to play perfect football from week 1 through championship weekend.
Yeah, Matt, and remember, this is the current system of the ACC. It would be very difficult a couple of years from now when you add SMU and
Cal and Stanford.
It'll be a lot easier. The strength.
Then you're talking to top to bottom juggernaut when it comes to adding Cal, Stanford, and SMU. So look, there's so many games that can dictate a team's success throughout the year. And I think LSU and Florida State is fascinating for so many reasons. The comeback last year that fell short for LSU. Jaden Daniels, I think, is going to be a sleeper Heisman Trophy candidate. We know Jordan Travis is among the best in the country. So this will be a fun one to watch on Labor Day weekend. I am not going to get through a week 1 show here without getting your 4 college football playoff teams so we can put this in YouTube cement and run it when we're both horribly wrong later.
Yeah, I have struggled with this all year, Matt, and I can't even believe I'm going to give you the four most predictable names in the world.
Do it. I love it.
But I'm going to, because I can't find anyone else. So I'm going with Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, and Alabama. It's very safe. It's unimaginative. It would get me laughed off the noon Sports Center, but I just gave it.
All right, so those are your sports. So to repeat, you're going 2 SEC, Georgia, Alabama, 2 Big Ten, Michigan, Ohio State. All right, I'm going to go USC, Pac-12.
Ooh.
Even though the defense left me a lot to desire against San Jose State, I think USC is loaded. I think they're going to figure it out. They're getting to the playoff. I'm going Sark in Texas.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm going Sark in Texas to win the Big 12 in their final year and get to the college football playoff. I'm going LSU.
Oh, my goodness.
Out of the SEC. I think they've got enough coming back, and I believe
right now you're 0 for 3.
Georgia is just enough gettable, and I think LSU is the best team in the SEC West. And finally, I am going with the Ohio State Buckeyes because I believe of any team in the country, skill position from receiver into running back, they are loaded. If you can find a quarterback that can just distribute the ball like a point guard, I think Ohio State's the best team in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on Ohio State, and even though I know what Michigan has, and
they're loaded.
You've been told enough times, but I also know who's coaching Michigan.
Yep, that's true. Well, not for the first 3 games. I mean, you could be coaching them for the first 3 games; they'd go undefeated.
But I think, I mean, there are a couple. I mean, not to break down what we've done, but I admire what you've done. You've gone a little bit on the edge. I just couldn't do it. Sark, I want to believe in. Don't. Southern Cal, I just can't quite get over what I saw Saturday night. Even in limited, I just think that defense will crumble in November when that schedule gets brutal. And in LSU, I just don't think they'll get out of Alabama. And Matt, I appreciate you putting Georgia in, leaving Georgia out. That would be food for the masses on the Paul Finebaum show this afternoon.
I just don't look at. I'm totally banking on history here. I know they've got the schedule to set it up, but just we could go hours on this.
Yeah,
you like at some point rolling out new starters every year after going to the NFL, and now for the first time in 2 years without Stetson Bennett, that's got to catch up with you at some point.
I'll tell you another school I almost put in there was Clemson. I know everybody loves Florida State, but I'm more of a believer in them. But it is. We will both be very wrong.
Horribly
one prediction.
Horribly wrong. Like we thought Desmond Howard's playoff picks a year ago were laughable.
Yeah, you can't. Actually, in the history of mankind, there will never be a worse 3 worse predictions than those.
So the next time,
the good news for Desmond, I think 2 of the 4. One got to the playoffs, and 2 of the other 3, I think, one of the other 3 had winning records. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you want for your playoff predictions. Next time Paul and I speak, it'll be Sunday recapping a fun week 1 of the season is Labor Day weekend. Congratulations. We made it through the offseason. For Paul Finebaum, I am Matt Barrie. This is the Matt Barrie Show on the ESPN College Football YouTube channel.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.